Hello, Internet. Welcome to Apocalyst Reviews and our review of Terminator Dark Fate. When doing a review of a standalone movie, you get a standalone review. But for a movie and a franchise, especially one as integral to our culture as the Terminator series, you have to pay homage to and look at the series as a whole to really get better perspective on why the latest entry is either good or bad, as it's got a place not by itself, but in a larger tale. In other words, it's a part of something bigger than itself. I mean, with this series here, we get classic lines such as, "I'll be back," that everyone knows. So I'm going to give a quick rundown of the series before diving into Dark Fate. So to start with, we have Terminator 1 that launched the whole series. Directed by James Cameron and released in 1984, it was a classic and one of the all-time greats of American cinema. It was the perfect balance of thriller, suspense, and horror. It introduced us all to terrifying Terminators that could look just like us, and in addition to being nearly impossible to stop, as Kyle Reese put it, can't be reasoned with, can't be bargained with, and it will never stop. Scary as heck to imagine being a target of one of these bad boys, or in the future fighting for survival against them, only to come out at night and hiding in terror during the day. The movie made you question what was to be in the future and how our choices affected it, and how terrifying it could be for us all if we don't make the right choices now. We get to see Arnold Schwarzenegger, who is one of my personal all-time favorite actors, step into the iconic role for the first time. No Terminator movie after would be complete without an appearance by him. Great movie. Then Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Again, directed by James Cameron and released in 1991, cranked the dial to 11 and managed to be even better than the first film and also reached a wider audience. Supposedly at the time of its release, it had the largest budget of any movie ever made. That was money put to good use, let me tell you. T2, as many call it, was a slightly different style of movie, but just as good, if not better, than its predecessor. It was more action-focused with a lot of excitement, while retaining a lot of the suspense seen in the first movie and expanding on the lore. T2 holds up well and to this day looks fantastic. Another great movie and cinema classic. When I was a kid, I couldn't watch this movie enough. Not only is it great in its own right, but it's got a lot of nostalgic value for me. It brings back memories of being a kid and watching it on weekends in my dad's house with my brother and sisters. At this point, the movie itself was great, but I couldn't help but dream of how cool and scary seeing a movie set in one of the flashbacks to the future would be. I just said flashback, but maybe I should say flash forward, since while it is a memory to some of the characters, this dark dystopian world where the war against the machines takes place technically happens in the future they're fighting to prevent. Anyways, these flash forwards depict fighting a seemingly unstoppable enemy with laser guns, hiding in a skull-strewn apocalyptic wasteland where you could only come out at night, Terminators hiding in human skid, ready to mow you down on sight, and being led by the legendary John Connor. As a kid, I just wished that one day I could see a movie as epic as T2 set in this future wasteland. The question is, would I ever get my wish? Okay, then along comes Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines. But this time, it was directed by Jonathan Mostow instead of James Cameron and was released in 2003. As the angry video game nerd once said, I was ready to have my balls blown off by awesomeness. I went into theaters to see this movie with my hopes sky high. I love the first two movies, and heck, I'd even enjoyed many of the comics and games, like RoboCop vs. the Terminator. Ever play that? Man, the hard engraved case it came in was one of a kind. I mean, no other Super Nintendo or Sega games came in anything like it, so you just knew it was going to be great before you even started playing it. Hard as balls game, but it really stayed true to the feel of the movies, and gave a glimpse of what it might be like fighting in the war against the machines after organized humanity was wiped out. I actually beat it as a kid, and really enjoyed it. After everything associated with this powerhouse of a series kicking so much butt, I knew that this movie, T3, was going to be pure awesomeness that lived up to the legendary name of Terminator. And everything in the franchise had come before it. Sadly, though, instead of being another great addition to the franchise, this is where the trouble begins. One of the first scenes that always comes to mind when I think of this movie is John Connor breaking into a veterinary clinic or something and getting caught in one of the cages. And the girl in there, rather than calling the cops, tells John he was her first kiss. It just seems strange to me. What are the chances of that happening to someone like that? You're just casually getting caught robbing some allegedly random place, a veterinary clinic of all places, and the next thing you know, a girl who's obviously still infatuated with your dreamy eyes is telling you that you're her first. What is the point of a stupid scene like this? And quite honestly, in a way, I thought this set the tone for the whole movie. There were some good scenes, and probably the best thing I can say about it is that the action figures the McFarlane Toys put out based on scenes from this movie were pretty cool. I actually still to this day have a lot of them. Needless to say, this movie fell well short of the greatness of the first two movies. It lacked the suspense and horror of the first movie, and most of the action and excitement of the second movie, and replaced it with disappointment. It just wasn't a good movie. There were some cool scenes, I guess, but I just didn't remember enjoying it much. As I'm figuring out with how many of our beloved franchises are being handled, which I'll get into more in future videos, when you're talking about a movie in one of these franchises, there's a difference between a movie that just isn't good and one that sucks because it jacks up the canon. This movie doesn't mess up the canon for the most part, but I just didn't like it. It did mess up the way John Connor looked, though. When he took charge at the end of the movie, there was no way I could believe that this guy could lead a successful resistance. Couldn't they have picked an actor and written a script that portrayed him as tough, resourceful, and ready to take charge when things get real? This guy couldn't even hold down a job or successfully rob a freaking veterinary clinic, so how can I believe he's a brilliant commander who can teach people how to fight and successfully lead a resistance against tough-as-balls machines? Not the worst movie ever, but a letdown after the first two, for sure. But hey, at least it didn't mess up the canon too much. This movie essentially is the Terminator franchise, what episodes 1 through 3 are of the Star Wars universe. Not the worst thing they could have done, or that they did do, and it didn't mess up the canon, but it left you asking if it was a story that needed to be told, and if so, was this the way to do it? So next comes Terminator Salvation. And can we call it Terminator 4? Because that's what I was asking myself at the time. This one had yet another director, Joseph McGinty Nicol, who apparently also goes by the nickname McG, and was released in 2009. The Sarah Connor Chronicles actually came out before it in 2008, but while Chronicles is technically canon, I'm just focusing on the movies, which is, I think, what most people have seen. This is when things in this beastified series were set to get serious. It's a movie I've been waiting for. Finally, we'd get to see a movie set in a dystopian wasteland dominated by darkness, fear, and freaking heavy metal Terminators. Finally, we'd get to see the actual war against the machines. Skulls everywhere, only coming out at night, terrifying Terminators everywhere. And I love Christian Bale, who was starring as the legendary John Connor. It was going to be so awesome, right? Yeah, never before have I been so wrong. This movie was horse-ass! This movie essentially is the Terminator franchise, what episodes 7 to 9 are to the Star Wars universe. You want to know why? Not only did it suck, but it committed the worst sin a movie attached to a franchise ever can. It messed up the canon. For me, the biggest letdown was the look of the future. Now they can only come out during the day? I don't care what their scientific reasons are for it. I came for a good movie. If I wanted things explained by science, I'd go take a chemistry class. If we want real, how about they not make the movie at all, and we sit around waiting for the real future to come? They should have kept every outdoor scene shrouded in darkness, covered in skulls, and in line with every scene from the flashbacks in the first two movies. They couldn't do it, and they effed it up. Everything was already done before them by legendary director James Cameron. All they had to do was replicate the look, design, feel, and fear he'd already laid out for them. And they effed it up. And effed it up hard! I didn't like the Terminator mainframe taking on the image of a fairly attractive woman either. In the first two movies, they sent back machines that took on the form of someone cold and scary, and the image they used here simply didn't convey that. I don't want the image of somebody that looks comforting. I want somebody that looks really scary. When a movie is made that is part of a franchise or series of stories in a canon, I think the creators of the new edition have an obligation to ensure it builds on everything that came before it, pays respect to it, and doesn't do anything to contradict or damage any of the story that came before it. This movie took a huge dump on the face of the movies that came before it by painting the war against the machines in an entirely new light. Light being the key word, as they now must come out during the day. So in short, not only did this let me down as a standalone movie, meaning I don't think I would have liked it with or without the Hollow Terminator name attached to it, but since it was part of a franchise, I despise it for how it altered the future we'd all been hoping to see. Salvation being attached to the title is an almost comical farce. That is the most inappropriate use of that word I've ever seen. Next comes Terminator Genisys. This one was directed by Alan Taylor and was released in 2015. At this point, when the movie came out, I had serious franchise fatigue, brought on by the onslaught of disappointment from the last two movies. I didn't actually watch it when it was new. This was in part due to the fact that every review I got a whiff of, and every person I talked to who had seen it, seemed to say it was weird or strange at best and bad at worst. I, for the first time since being exposed to the Terminator franchise, had zero, and I mean zero desire to see this new Terminator movie. It wasn't bitterness or resentment, it was more akin to apathy that I felt. I just didn't care as I had more important things in my life, like school, work, and movies that were actually good, taking up my time. I may get into a more in-depth review of this movie in a future video. Let's just suffice to say for the time being that my search for a satisfying new addition to the franchise continued. So finally, we're at the grand finale. Up to this point in the series at least, who knows if there will be anything after this. Terminator Dark Fate. This one was directed by Tim Miller and was released in 2019. This one had something going on that made it special compared to its recent predecessors and got a lot of people, me included, excited. James Cameron, if you recall, directed the first two films. He came back as a producer slash story writer, which gave this movie some potential. It's complicated to explain how I felt going into this, because on one hand, much of the apathy I felt when Genesis came out still lingered for me. Yet deep down, I still loved the franchise, was pretty excited to see what would happen with James Cameron back on the scene to help steer the ship. So, I go to see the movie, and my honest opinion when leaving the theater was that I actually enjoyed it overall. This movie definitely has flaws, which I will get into shortly, but there was actually a lot going on that I think made it feel like a solid Terminator movie. Sadly, one thing is undeniable. It didn't last in theaters for long and was considered a failure at the box office. It has flaws, for sure, but it's still a sad day for me when someone like me who remembers the glory days of a beloved franchise like this must watch the painful failure of a movie like this. On one hand, you hope it teaches anyone producing future movies a lesson, but it just leaves you wishing they hadn't effed it up so bad in the first place. So, spoiler alert. I'm about to get into spoilers, so if you don't want to hear any, you've been warned. So, to start with the spoilers, I'm going to get into some of the things I thought hurt the movie, or that, didn't make sense to me, that I didn't really care for. So, number one, it starts off, scene number one, with John Connor being killed by a T-800 Terminator played by young CGI Arnold Schwarzenegger. Right away, it sets the tone that, as John Connor said in T2, it's like, everything I've been brought up to believe was all made of bullshit? I hated her for that. End quote. So all the trials and sacrifices of the earlier films were for nothing? Complete crap. That means Kyle Reese, Sarah, along with everything and everyone we've known from previous installments, is rendered useless along with John Connor himself. Also, where was his protector? Every other time John was targeted by a machine from the future, he had a protector sent back as well. So, why not this time? Or maybe he did get sent back and got lost. Who knows? So this here's a nitpick, but why are the people and machines coming from the future in this film all materialize way up in the air, like we're talking 15 or 20 stories, and then have to come crashing down? It just seems strange to me and a needless change to them materializing normally on the ground as we'd seen in most previous films. 3. The movie early on starts off showing us that the main protagonist is being protected by a fairly attractive girl, which we'll call Superwoman from the future. She seems to be a good actor or actress, but it's just hard for me to believe that a super skinny human girl with supermodel looks to match her augmented superhuman strength from the future is going to be effective fighting against a freaking Terminator that is liquid metal over a metal endoskeleton. Because they combined the two in this one, kind of like in T3. I just miss having a tough as nails Kyle Reese like in T1 or a huge Terminator like in T2 to protect our protagonist as it made it seem more real. And it's equally 4. I'd also say it's also equally hard to believe that a relatively small girl who works doing something in a factory is destined to lead the resistance in place of John Connor, who's now dead. I guess the truth is that I wouldn't have probably liked anyone they picked for this new role. I've got over 30 years of thinking of John Connor as the savior of humanity after our defeat to the machines. It's hard for me now to accept that they've now changed that. It doesn't help that the character has no backstory that would support her being able to teach people to fight and be resourceful enough to survive in a nuclear wasteland, as we're told John Connor had done. Couldn't they have made a character ex-military who is now designing weapons or something? Just, an idea for something that, to me at least, would have made more sense for her stepping in this role. 5. I personally hated the point about it's not her womb, it's her. It seemed like it downplayed an important part of what she is or could be for something greater than herself. The point is that it's about her, which is a subtle but important difference in the purpose and meaning of what the character is doing in contrast to what Sarah had done. Sarah Connor had connected with her on this previously, this character in the movie, the main character, and was able to apply her insight as she said she understood what it was like to be hunted for the child you will have. And the girl's guardian from the future stood there and said nothing, at least until much later in the movie when the big climax was that it's not her womb, it's her. Whoa. And the one and only real connection her and Sarah had over this, during this movie, was thrown out the window. Right now, in most countries in the West, birth rates are below replacement, meaning we're dying off faster than we are having babies, as many people can't afford them or are putting things like careers first. So putting this crap in there seems like a needless modern twist to the story in line with contemporary moral and societal decay. In Terminator 3, for example, they mentioned how one day John Connor's kids would be important, giving a sense of something bigger than themselves, a reason to fight so that those after them could carry on. Here, nope, it's just about her. I mean, I guess you could say that's a nitpick too, but it's still something that I just didn't really care for. Skynet is now also a thing in the past, and it's being replaced by something called Legion. Again, I think it's just hard after 30 plus years of Skynet being the supervillain entity for me to switch over to something else. Skynet is a name nearly anyone can recognize, and what's equally frustrating is that Legion is essentially exactly the same as Skynet. So for the love of Pete, what's the point in changing its name? And 7, this is something I touched on with one of the other movies. I yet again didn't like the look of the future and the flash forwards the movie had. The fact that James Cameron was involved and it still got effed up means that my hopes and dreams of getting something actually set in the future as depicted in T1 and T2 have now effectively dropped to as mathematically close to zero as possible. Every future scene was hazy, as though it was the dawn of a big rain, not dark as midnight and scary, post-apocalypse style. And this touched on another point. There is a scene where, in the future, where the hot, skinny human protector from the future was in the future fight against Skynet, Legion, and you got a glimpse of a couple things that didn't make sense. It's possible I didn't see it perfectly, but it appeared they were shooting with regular guns, not the laser-type guns we saw being used in T2 shots of the future. Also, they were fighting liquid metal Terminator hybrids. We all know that liquid metal versions are nearly impossible to stop, so how'd they do it with guns firing regular bullets, or with anything in that apocalyptic wasteland at all? Also, they appeared to be fighting at the gates of a base. Didn't seem like there was much hiding, as the Terminators at that point definitely knew it was there. Point 9. Sarah Connor has been spending her days fighting every Terminator coming in from the future. Now that John is dead, who are these Terminators being sent back? Were they all from Skynet, which now no longer exists in the future? How does Sarah do this? I get that she's supposed to be a badass and all now, but killing a Terminator, even a non-liquid one, is no small feat. They all have a protector from the human resistance set alongside them too? If so, where are all the other protectors from the future? 10. I didn't get the constant friction between Sarah and Superwoman from the future. I thought it was pointless, especially considering their situation. I mean, didn't they have bigger things to worry about than, being on each other's case all the time? 11. Why wasn't Sarah asking the question she did in T2? Who is responsible for making this new dark future happen? Doesn't she want to stop Legion from forming as she wanted to do with Skynet? Probably wouldn't have worked, as her actions before merely postponed Judgment Day, which is perhaps why Sarah didn't do it, but still, it just seemed like it would have been more in line with her character's personality to have been looking for that and trying to figure out a way to stop it. And maybe that'll come later. And maybe I missed something, but why in the heck did the evil Terminator, who is blending seamlessly in with border agents, start fighting and wiping them out once the detainees were released? I didn't get what was going on there, but he was wiping them out left and right. Okay, so that Having said that, here are some things that I liked. Number one, this goes one of my points above, actually, as we do in a way get what I was hoping for. A T-800 Terminator comes in to help protect our main character alongside Superwoman from the future, which is harkening back to good old days of T2. I like that Arnold comes back and is playing the part of a Terminator with a freaking story arc. I thought that was pretty cool. He starts off as a standard bad guy who kills John Connor, but then without any more directives from Skynet, is free to do whatever he wants. He somehow develops some form of conscience, marries a girl, and starts a business selling drapes or something. And we find out it was him who was sending Sarah the messages about Terminator drop locations. I thought it was pretty cool and a decent excuse to put Arnold back in the role. Number 2, Sarah joins the team. It's almost like we got the gritty Kyle Reese back, whose absence, or the absence of someone as believably tough as him, I had lamented earlier. This harkens back to good old days of T1. So I was happy to see her, actually. 3. I like seeing most of the old cast come together. Seeing Sarah together with Arnold felt like the reunion between Luke, Leia, and Han that we never got in the new Star Wars films of episodes 7 through 9. So I applaud them for finding a believable way to do it here, giving us a chance to see them together on the big screen interact one last time. I also felt like, despite my criticisms, that this had some of the suspense and dread of the earlier films. When the liquid metal over regular metal Terminator came around, I'd be crapping my pants at times and asking how in the H they were going to stop it or get away. I mean, I thought some of those scenes were really intense and well done. The fight scene at the end was pretty good. I enjoyed watching everyone come together, get their butts kicked, but then ultimately pull off the victory by a thread. It made it feel like there were some real sacrifices on the parts of the characters. Overall, I can't help the fact that I enjoyed this movie. I mean, I did. However, that doesn't change the fact that my questions and criticisms outweigh my list of likes, which is probably the way it was for most people and why many decided to not go see it, and this was considered a flop at the box office. The movie is worth watching in my humble opinion if you're a fan of the series. It's not perfect, and you should know that going into it, but despite its shortcomings, I felt like it was worth watching at least once. Alright, that's the Apocalyst review for Terminator Dark Fate. Until next time.